Good evening. We're back with more Marvel Champions, and this evening will be a preview of the Psylocke Hero Pack. As of today, 8/13/2023, this Hero Pack has not been released yet, nor has the Next Evolution expansion. We're going to take a look at Psylocke and talk about where I think this hero will land in terms of the amount of content I think that she will be capable of taking on in true solo on higher difficulties, which is what I play the overwhelming majority of the time. I will say as a disclaimer, as I did before the Next Evolution expansion, that my experience with previews is that a lot of times viewers are looking for essentially hype because we all get excited for new content. And a lot of times when we look at previews, the inclination is to want someone to get excited about it with us, and I have done that in the past as well. The issue with that is that then sometimes you buy the product when it comes out and it doesn't live up to the hype, and that sucks. I have experienced that with both video games and movies and card games, as I'm sure we all have. So, I am not inclined toward hyping new content. Instead, I will attempt to give an honest evaluation of where I think the strength of this hero will end up. And if you are looking for pure hype, I think there is other content available that will be more to your liking. But if you're looking for a honest evaluation of the hero pack, then you're in the right place. I haven't seen these cards yet, but if you've seen my hero tier list or my other videos, you'll know that in general what I'm looking for in a hero is the ability to generate resources or draw cards, and or the ability to deal burst damage or damage that can ignore retaliate, because those are the criteria that are necessary to be good against very difficult scenarios. The three most difficult scenarios in the game, Magneto, Venom Goblin, and Ronin, two of them have retaliate, and it is often required that you spend resources in order to get rid of villain attachments. If you can't do that, then the villain gradually builds up strength over the course of the game. And if you can't generate big turns where you're generating 3 or 4 more resources than normal, it becomes very hard to set up your board during stage 2 so that you can defeat a difficult stage 3 of a villain. So that's why we're looking for what we're looking for. We want to be able to generate resources and or draw cards. We prefer that occasionally they have the ability to draw 3 or 4 or generate 3 or 4 extra resources in order to consider a hero to be S plus tier in true solo, or S tier, S plus meaning capable of taking on any scenario in the game, S tier meaning capable of taking on most scenarios in the game. So that will be the lens through which we're looking at this hero. I think in my tier list, the majority of heroes ended up in C, D, or F, with, I don't know, 30% or so would be my guess without looking at it again above that. And so we'll see where Psylocke ends up. And with those disclaimers out of the way, let's get started. Psylocke has a recovery 3, hand size 6, hit points 10, and has the setup ability Psionic Manifestation. Put your 2 Sci Energy Upgrades into play, Psy Knife side face up. Action exhaust 1 Sci Energy Upgrade, shuffle 1 Psionic card from your discard pile into your deck. Generally speaking, I don't really value shuffling a card from your discard pile into your deck. But let's take a look at these Sci Energy Upgrades so we can get some idea of what we're working with. Here's the Sci Energy Upgrade. It's a double-sided card. You get 2 of them. Psy Knife side. Psylocke gets +1 thwart. Exhaust Psy Knife. Generate a science resource. You may flip this card, and when you flip it, you get Psy Katana. Psylocke gets +1 attack, and her basic attacks gain piercing. Exhaust Psy Katana. Generate a strength resource. You may flip this card. So, if you have 2 Sci knives on the table. If your upgrades are both on the Sci knife side, you'll get +2 thwart, or you can have +2 attack, or you can have 1 thwart and 1 attack, and you'll be able to generate 2 resources per round no matter which side you're on. These are clearly very, very strong upgrades, and Psylocke's kit is going to revolve around them. Let's take a look at the Psylocke hero card. Psylocke has 1-1-2 in stats, but functionally she has 2-2-2 or 3-1-2, depending on where you've got her upgrades situated, and those are pretty good stats. Sci Energy Control is her hero ability. Interrupt when you use one of Psylocke's basic powers, thwart attack or defense. Flip 1 Sci Energy Upgrade. It is not a forced interrupt, so it will be optional. Hand size of 4. Well, the ability to generate 2 resources is great. Hand size of 4 is not. Hand size of 4, that's going to put Psylocke in the... Well, Nova starts with a hand size of 5, and Supernova helmet on the table. Doesn't start with it on the table, but he gets it in the hand, and so he starts with a hand size of 5 with the ability to generate an additional wild resource. Psylocke has the hand size of 4, but the ability to generate 2 resources per round. We can forgive the hand size of 4 when you're guaranteed 2 resource generation per turn, if she also has the ability to draw cards in some other way or generate resources in some other way. Because as I mentioned at the top of the video, we're looking for big turns where you can generate 3 or 4 extra resources, and the reason we're looking for those big turns is so that we can get set up for the future while also being able to deal with whatever the villain's done this turn. So if you're playing on a very difficult scenario where the villain brings in a big minion, or if you're playing Heroic 1 and he brings in 2, or a minion and an attachment, to make progress in that turn you need to be able to deal with what the villain brought to the table, and then potentially deal damage or whatever. If you want to build up for the future, then what you need to be able to do is play a card to the table like a hero-specific upgrade, or an Avengers Mansion, or a Helicarrier, or an X-Jet, or whatever. And then also be able to deal with what the villain's brought to the table. That way you can hold steady so that you're not losing or getting overwhelmed, and you can build up your board so that you get stronger, so that you can then deal with the villain getting stronger when you push them from stage 2 into stage 3. That's why we're looking for the ability to have a big turn where you generate 3 or 4 extra resources. That's so that you can build up your board for the future while also dealing with whatever the villain's brought to the board in that turn. And when you're dealing with very difficult villains, when you're dealing with easy villains, sometimes their encounter cards don't do a lot. In fact, they may not do much at all that you need to deal with, and therefore it's very easy to build up your board. But against very difficult villains, they almost always do something that you have to deal with. And so to deal with whatever they've done that turn and then also make progress for the future, you need to have a big turn. So, can Psylocke do that? Well, hand size of 4 is 1 less than the standard, but she generates 2 resources, so that puts her at 1 more than the standard. If she has the ability to go further than that and draw 2 extra cards or so, or generate 2 extra resources, she doesn't have to be able to do that every turn. Just every now and then would be sufficient. Well, then we'd be looking at a very strong hero from the resource generation standpoint. So let's dive into her kit. That'll be what we're looking for. The hand size 4 isn't necessarily going to sink her the way it has a lot of heroes, because she can generate 2 extra resources every round. But we are looking for more than that in order for her to have a mega turn, and we're also looking for burst damage, or damage that ignores retaliate. So we've seen the hero card, we've seen the alter ego, we've seen her upgrades that start on the table, and those are very good. So let's move on and take a look at her hero-specific ally, which is Angel, a 3-cost ally with 1 thwart to attack after you play Angel from your hand. Ready your identity. Not bad. He's maybe slightly better than the average hero-specific ally. Not a lot better, but maybe slightly better. You can get 4 attack, a chump block, and a ready from Psylocke, which is going to be good for potentially 3 attack or 3 thwart if you want. So you can give Angel credit for maybe 7 damage plus a chump block. It's not bad. It's not exceptional, but it's above average for a hero-specific ally. So let's move on and take a look at Psylocke's events. Flurry of Blades. 3-cost event. Deal 2 damage to an enemy. For each Psy Knife you control, choose an enemy and confuse it. For each Psy Katana you control, choose an enemy and deal 2 damage. If I'm not mistaken, this looks like potentially, if you're running 2 Psy Katanas at the time, a 2, 2, and 2 attack. Each of those, that would be 3 attacks in total, which means that if you used a buff for that damage, you could buff all 3 of the attacks. So, for example, if you use the Aggression Resource card, which increases damage by 1 of an attack, you could go up to 3, 3, and 3, which would be 9 damage for the Flurry of Blades, and each of those would be prone to retaliate, but 9 for 3 would be good. 6 for 3 is not that good. 6 for 3 is not that good. If you did get, let's say, a 2 damage, and a confuse, that's probably what you'll want to do most often. 1 Psy Knife, 1 Psy Katana, that would be 4 damage and a confuse. It's okay. It's okay. It's more or less the standard amount of value that we'd be looking for from an event. Nothing exceptional, nothing terrible. I would say for a hero-specific event, I would call this one a little bit underpowered. Typically, events that have the ability to confuse or stun end up a little bit more powerful than this, and I think the reason why it's a little bit underpowered is because of its versatility. That's what the card is going for, because you can choose different enemies to deal damage to, so essentially you could use this as an AoE ability. You can buff it, and if you're able to take advantage of the buffs, you can buff it up pretty high because you got 3 individual attacks here. So I think the versatility is the reason why this is a little bit underpowered, and if you've watched my videos before, you'll know that versatility at the expense of power in true solo is not good. So I would say the strength of this event, it has some potential for comboing with other cards that increase the attack. But apart from that, this would be on the weaker side as far as events go. What I would prefer to see is something more like 3 damage to an enemy and then 3 damage per attack, or a confuse if you've got a Psy Knife out. Though that would probably be too strong. Probably too strong. So maybe something like 3 damage base and then 2 damage for each Psy Katana. I think that would be pretty reasonable. So I'd like to see this buffed by 1 damage. But it's not going to be, and that's because pretty consistently, if a card has versatility in Marvel Champions, or if a hero has versatility, then they don't have power. That's pretty much always been the case, and it seems like with the 2 Psy Katanas, with the varying combos you can do with them, versatility is what this hero is going for. And based on the patterns that I've seen in the past with other heroes that were going for versatility, like for example the Wasp or Vision. I think Vision was originally intended to be a versatile hero. He ended up being an S+ tier hero because of Bring It and Ultron and the way those two interact with each other, but I don't think that was intended in its design. I think he was really intended to be like a versatility type hero, as the Wasp is, and the pattern with those heroes in the past has been that they don't generate resources or draw cards, and so I'd actually be a little bit surprised if we see any more resource generation or card draw from Psylocke in her future cards. I think the 2 upgrades is all we're going to get, but we'll see. And I would expect this pattern to present itself in the other events that we see as well. If they're going for versatility, I would expect them not to be that powerful. But let's see. We'll take a look. Next up, we have Mental Detection, a 2-cost event. Remove 1 threat from a scheme for each Psy Knife you control. Remove 2 additional threat from that scheme. For each Psy Katana you control, draw 1 card. So, best case scenario in terms of removing threat, you get 2 for 5. It's okay. It's, I think, roughly equivalent to what a Phantom Flip from Ghost Spider, which is not bad. Or you can get 1 threat and draw 2 cards, which is better. That's very good. Remove 1 threat and draw 2 cards is very good. And I'm surprised that that option is available, given what I just said when looking at the last event. But I'm pleased with that. We're still not getting to the +3 or 4 that we're after. If we played a mental detection and used Psylocke's ability, well, we have to spend 2 resources to draw these 2 cards. So it's an effective cycle card. It's not an effective resource generator, but it is an effective cycle card. I like this card. It's the strongest of the, well, it's the stronger of the 2 events that we've seen so far. It's good value. Good value. Nothing exceptional, but good value. We haven't seen the kind of burst damage that we're looking for, and we haven't seen the kind of resource generation or card draw that we're looking for either. Let's move on to the next card. Psyonic Redirect. When you would take any amount of damage, this costs 2. When you would take any amount of damage, prevent 2 of that damage. For each Psy Katana, prevent 2 additional. For each Psy Knife, confuse that enemy. So you can prevent 6 damage for 2, which I would consider in value roughly equal to like an energy shield. Or you could prevent 4 and confuse the enemy, which is good value. Nothing exceptional, but it is good value. What we're looking at is a versatility-based hero, and a little bit stronger than the versatility heroes we've seen before. I would say she's stronger than Wasp. I would say she's stronger than Vision, the base Vision, if you're not playing Bring It. But so far, nothing exceptional. So next up we have Psyonic Training, so we're into the upgrades for the hero. A 1-cost upgrade. Psylocke ignores the guard and patrol keywords. Okay, definitely within the versatility theme of Psylocke. After Psylocke thwarts, discard Psyonic Training, confuse an enemy. Well, ignoring the guard and patrol keyword isn't very important to do. Most of the time we want to keep the board clear. And so like with a hero like Shadowcat, I actually found myself in a situation very rarely where I wanted to ignore guard or patrol. Most of the time we want to clear the board. So yeah, whether your card has guard, the minion has guard or patrol isn't that relevant. We still want to kill it. Every now and then it comes up where you might want to do this. Maybe in multiplayer more often, I'm not really sure, but I would say ignoring the guard and patrol isn't that important, so I would just look at this as a 1-cost confuse the enemy, but only after confuse an enemy, but only after thwarting. It's good value. The requirement that you have to thwart does detract from it a little bit. Psylocke's got a lot of ways to confuse the enemy, 2 different events, and I assume there will be multiple copies of them, and then Psyonic Training. This may not always get used. Occasionally it will. Sometimes it'll get thrown away to pay for other things, though, just because the guard and patrol keywords aren't that important to ignore. And the last card that has been revealed from the Psylocke kit so far is Weapons Training, a 2-cost upgrade. Psylocke gains Retaliate. After Psylocke attacks, discard Weapons Training, ready each weapon upgrade you control. If you ready your 2 weapon upgrades, then you can exhaust them again to generate 2 more resources. So essentially you can get Retaliate for free, and that's great. Pay 2 resources, keep this on the board for a while, and then use it to get a big turn. This is a very good card. This is a very good card. It doesn't really generate resources, but it makes it possible to pay it forward. It's not always going to be an easy card to play, to find the resources to play. It's only 2, but it doesn't do a lot right away. In fact, it doesn't do anything right away. So if you're trying to deal with what the boss has done for the round, this doesn't help you to do that unless you can make good use of the retaliate. But it is a very good card, and it allows for the potential of a very good turn where you can build up for the future. Overall, my best guess in terms of where I would place this hero on the tier list, probably the B tier. It's possible she could go as high as A tier, but given that her hand size is only 4, my guess is that we're looking at B tier, and that is good considering the 4 hand size. But I'm guessing we're not looking at anything higher than B tier because we're looking at a more versatility focused hero, and versatility at this expensive power isn't really what we're looking for. But given that it is more versatility focused, and that she's more versatility focused, and that she's got a hand size of 4, B tier is pretty decent. I would consider that a relatively safe prediction. Could go as high as A tier, could drop down to C tier, but somewhere in that neighborhood. This is definitely not going to be an S plus or S tier hero, nor would I put her in the S minus A plus tier where Iron Man, Spider-Man, and Venom live. So I think we're looking at A as her ceiling, B is most likely, C is possible. Let's move on and take a look at the aspect cards that have been revealed, which are coming in the Psylocke Hero Pack. First up, we have Captain Britain, Brian Braddock. 4-cost ally from the Justice aspect, 3 thwart, 3 attack, 3 health, 2 consequential damage. Captain Britain takes -1 consequential damage after he thwarts a side scheme or attacks a minion. So best case scenario, you get 6 damage or 6 thwarting from him, and then a chump block. It's not good. Base. The base is not very good. 6 thwart or 6 attack, and then a chump block for 4 cost isn't very good. The only way to make this good is to get more out of it by like healing some of the consequential damage off, or healing some of the wounds off, and in true solo you're not going to be able to do that effectively since he comes from the Justice aspect. So I don't think this ally is good, and I wouldn't run him in a Justice deck, at least not in true solo. Cypher, 2-cost ally, 1 thwart, 1 attack, 2 health. After Cypher attacks and damages a confused enemy, draw 1 card. Well, that's okay. So you would get like 1 damage, a card drawn. It's pretty solid if you could reliably damage a confused enemy each time you play him. You're not going to be able to, though. It's hard to set up 2-card combos. You'll be able to do it from time to time, but you're not going to want to hold Cypher in your hand until you confuse an enemy. So if you don't happen to have the enemy confused already, or confused in your hand when you have Cypher, you'll just let it go, most likely, and just take the 1 damage and the chump block. Now it is a 2-cost ally, and a lot of the time we're okay with 2-cost allies not doing a lot because we just want them to be chump blockers. So when I'm running like a one way or another Justice deck with Ironheart, I'll run pretty much every 2-cost ally that's available, whether they do a lot or not. So though I don't think Cypher is that high a value on average, he likely still gets a spot in a deck because he's 2-cost. Will he get cycled out as better 2-cost allies become available as we get more and more cards in the game? Yeah, he will. But for now, he could get a spot in some decks. I don't think he's like a must-have card, though. Or, a slam dunk. This is an amazing card that you have to have. he's a card that if you've already bought Psylocke, you can find a use for him in some decks, especially if your collection isn't like totally complete and you don't have all the other 2-cost allies that you might want to include in a deck. But that's about the limit of his usefulness. It's just he costs 2, and that's good for use as a chump blocker, and if you occasionally get to draw a card with him, great. So he gets he'll get a spot on decks for that reason. Upside the Head, 1-cost event. After your hero makes a basic attack and damages an enemy, confuse that enemy. If that enemy is already confused, stun it instead. Well, here's the thing about events or upgrades or any non-ally cards really from aspects. It's very, very rare that we want to include them in decks. There's only a very short list of non-ally cards that make it into top tier decks. And they'd be something like from Justice, I think One Way or Another, or Clear the Area are pretty much it. From Leadership, it's like Rapid Response or Regroup. And for Aggression, it's like Hone Technique, Dive Bomb. So it's very rare. What do we see from this? Well, basically it's a confuse for 1 cost. It's decent. There's not much more to say about it than that. It's decent value. It's acceptable. It's possibly something you want to run in a deck that really wants to confuse enemies. It'll give a lot of heroes that don't have a way to confuse an enemy a confuse, and in true solo that can be good because that then gives you the opportunity to switch to Alter Ego. And not every hero, well, some heroes in some scenarios you really need the enemy to be confused before you can switch to Alter Ego safely. So in that scenario, Upside the Head could be important. I could see this card seeing play in different Justice decks, especially in multiplayer. It's nothing exceptional, but it's solid. It could have synergy with cards that benefit from the enemy being confused, either because they require it to have an effect or, well, basically because they require it to have an effect. But it's good. It's very solid. Solid value for the cost. Concussive Blow, 3 cost, confuse an enemy if you paid for this card using a strength resource, deal 3 damage to that enemy. This one isn't as solid. This one is a little bit underpowered for its cost. I would like it to deal 4 damage, in which case I would consider it just as efficient as Upside the Head, but for 3 cost, so consider this, you get a confuse for 1 cost with Upside the Head. So what do we get for the 2 extra cost from Concussive Blow? For 2 extra cost, we get 3 damage. You already get a confuse if you pay 1 from Upside the Head, as long as you can get off a basic attack, and that's not too difficult. And if your enemy is already confused, then you can get a stun instead, so you got a little versatility as well. The only thing you get for the extra 2 that Concussive Blow costs you is 3 damage. And it has a requirement to use a strength resource. Would you play a card that costed 2 and dealt 3 damage? Or if this card said 1 cost to confuse an enemy, or you have the option of paying 2 resources to deal 3 damage, would you ever really deal the 3 damage? I don't think so. 2 costs for 3 damage is pretty bad. I think this card costs too much. It should probably say deal 4 damage and confuse an enemy. As it is, I don't think it'll get run very much. I think it's too expensive. Float Like a Butterfly. 2 cost upgrade. Play under any player's control, max 1 per player. When a character you control attacks a confused enemy, increase the amount of damage that attack deals to that enemy by 1. Well, the good thing about Float Like a Butterfly is that with Confuse, you can kind of control when the Confuse comes off the enemy. because it only happens with a thwart, and you don't have to flip to alter ego. So unless the villain gets a scheme, the confuse could stay there for a while, and you could get multiple turns of float like a butterfly. In decks where confuse is a prominent mechanic, it may be worth it to include float like a butterfly. This may be a card that gets included. It's any character that you control, so this works with minions too. Yeah, I'd say if your hero has the ability to confuse an enemy, this is a good card. And if you're just playing Justice, it may be worth it to play the one cost confuse that we just talked about and then also play float like a butterfly. I like this card. I think it's good. I think this unlocks a whole new archetype for, or a whole new strategy at least, for the Justice aspect, which is make sure you include a way to confuse the enemy and then also play float like a butterfly, because every character increasing the amount of damage the attack deals by 1 is a big deal. There's no limit. You don't exhaust this card. This is really, really good. This is really good because confuse can stay on the enemy for a while, so this unlocks a strategy where you're just trying to get a confuse on the enemy, and then you use float like a butterfly to deal damage with every attack, and then if you need it, you have the option of flipping to alter ego and getting that confuse off. This is really, really good. Really, really good. In fact, even if you don't really want Psylocke, this is probably a reason to pick up the hero pack all on its own. This is the best card in the hero pack, in my opinion. It's really good. It would be, I think, hard to understate how good this card is, I think. Reminds me a little bit of Flow Like Water, except I think this card's even better than Flow Like Water. Because the way we play in solo, we're trying to play an ally like every round, right? Or every other round, and each of the attacks that those allies do will deal 1 additional damage. You could easily get like 2, even 3 additional damage per round with this card when you've got a confuse on an enemy. That's crazy good. That's so good. So it looks like the best aspect for Psylocke is going to be Justice with one way or another. And Float Like a Butterfly might elevate her from a B tier up to an A. Yeah, I think this is really, really good. Probably a reason all by itself to buy Psylocke. So we're through the Justice cards. We got 2 basic cards. The Power of the Mind, double the number of resources this card generates while paying for a psionic card. Well, in Psylocke's kit, the events are psionic. There's also a psionic event for each aspect that Psylocke will be able to use and that the Power of the Mind could be used on. We'll have to see what the final count of cards in Psylocke's hero pack is, how many copies of each event she has. My initial thought is that there probably isn't enough psionic cards. There probably aren't enough psionic cards to really want to play the Power of the Mind, but there could be. It'll really depend on what the final total is, and maybe there will be more psionic cards added in this cycle. It's hard to say, but I mentioned that we were done with the Justice cards. There's actually one more, the player side scheme, but anyway, Power of the Mind, there's not much to say about it. If there's enough psionic cards in your deck to justify playing it, it'll be decent, it'll be worth a slot, but it's certainly not going to be a card that you, well, at least I don't think it's going to be a card that you must buy the Psylocke Hero Pack for. That would be Float Like a Butterfly. But it'll be a decent card. I used to play the Power in All of Us a lot, and that kind of reminds me, this card kind of reminds me of that one, which gives you 2 resources when paying for a basic card. But eventually I stopped using it, and I mean, that Power of the Mind, that's probably its ceiling or something like that. The second basic card that's been revealed for this hero pack is Telepathy. A 1-cost upgrade, play only if your identity has the Psyonic trait, max 1 per player. Exhaust Telepathy and spend 2 science resources, remove 2 threat from a scheme. I don't think this ever gets played. It's so expensive for what you get that you would only ever play this if you had a huge overabundance of resources and nothing to spend it on, and you couldn't find any other more efficient methods of threat removal. So yeah, I don't think this card ever gets played. Maybe if it was spend 1 science resource to remove 2 threat. Yeah, you could play it in that circumstance, but 2 for 2 threat, I think this is too expensive to play. And the final card that's been revealed for this hero pack is Player Side Scheme, Lay the Trap. A Justice side scheme. When defeated, the player who defeated this scheme deals 5 damage per player to the villain. And you have to clear 3 threat per player, and the side scheme costs 1 to play. So it's decent damage for the cost. The cost plus the threat for 5 damage per player. Well, the side schemes all increase in value. The side schemes that I've seen so far all increase in value the more players you add to the game, because this side scheme costs 1 resource to play, whether you have 1 player in the game or 4 players in the game. Now, the amount of threat you have to clear scales up, but the resource cost doesn't scale up. So you get more for the resource cost the more players you have in the game. And yes, you have to clear more threat, but it's going to be more efficient. So if you were playing in a solo game, you pay 1 resource, you clear 3 threat, and you get 5 damage. If you're in a 4-player game, you have to clear 12 threat, but you still only have to pay 1 resource, and you get 20 damage. Would I play this side scheme in solo play? I think Cable's going to want it. Would I play it in a Psylocke deck? It's borderline. Probably not. Probably not. I think it's borderline. It's nothing exceptional. I probably wouldn't play this outside of a Cable deck, but probably would in a Cable deck. But the reason to buy this hero pack is, well, Psylocke's gonna end up, I think, in the B tier. Ceiling could be A tier, floor would be C tier. But Float Like a Butterfly, that is something. That card is really, really good, I think. And I would personally buy the Psylocke hero pack just for Float Like a Butterfly, because I think Justice is already pretty good with One Way or Another. And now you got One Way or Another and Float Like a Butterfly. As long as a hero has the ability to confuse a villain. Yeah, I think that card is really, really good. And probably is going to push Psylocke up a tier. From B to B+, maybe A. We'll see. I'll definitely want this hero for that card. So that's the preview for the Psylocke hero pack. And thank you for watching.